Number 1. There was some form of mimic, doppelganger, shapeshifter in my old house. After recently moving out of that house and with no incidents in the month since moving, I feel like I'm ready to share my story. Essentially, in the house my family used to live in, there was some sort of entity that could shapeshift and look and mimic people and animals. The first encounter happened in late 2019, after we had already lived in that house for well over a decade. I was in bed with my girlfriend. We hadn't yet fallen asleep that night, and I was getting out of bed to go to the toilet before going to sleep. On the way out, I turned off the light. When I returned and opened the door, she called out and asked who was coming in. I responded that it was obviously me, and she screamed, so I turned on the light. She was freaking out, so I asked her what was going on. She said that a couple of minutes before I got back, someone who she presumed was me had entered the room, got into bed, and started cuddling up next to her. When I actually came back and she realized that she wasn't laying next to me, she moved as far away as possible. But when I turned the light on, no one was in the room besides us. She said it felt just like me cuddling up next to her. We ended up staying at her place that night, and she refused to ever come back. The next incident happened on the 11th of July 2020. I looked up the date of a football game that was on. I was watching the TV by myself when my dad opened the door and stood in the doorway. I wasn't paying much attention to him, and absent-mindedly asked him if he ended up watching the end of the game his team was playing in. They had made a pretty good comeback. He didn't respond, so I looked over at him and noticed that he was wearing one of my shirts, which was weird because it's not something he had ever done before. I then looked down and noticed that both of his legs were there. He had a leg amputated in 2017. Normally he'd have a fake leg, one that is basically just a metal pole with a foot on the end, not one you can mistake for an actual leg. I must have had a serious look of shock on my face because right after looking at his legs and noticing what was wrong, he backed away and slammed the door. I ran down to the back shed where my dad was earlier and found him there. I asked if he had just been in the house. He said he hadn't left the shed in hours. I didn't want to tell him what had happened, so I just told him I thought I heard him calling. I found the shirt Dad was wearing on my floor, along with a bunch of other dirty clothes. The next case also involves a mimic pretending to be Dad. Dad is a diabetic and will occasionally have a hypo where he becomes non-responsive, and it can sort of be like talking to a child who will hardly respond and doesn't know where they are or what's going on. Mom found him sitting on the couch and he wouldn't respond to her when she talked or nudged him. She worried that he was having a hypo. She went out to the kitchen to get insulin, but when she returned he wasn't on the couch. She then freaked out because she couldn't find him. After searching for a few minutes, she tried calling him, hoping that his phone was on him and she'd be able to hear it. Dad answered his phone. He'd been at work the whole time. The last encounter we had was a couple of months ago, about a week after our dog had passed away. She was old. I don't think the mimic caused it, if you were wondering. We were in the kitchen, from where you can see down the hallway. Leading off the hallway is another short hallway part, with a door on the end where our dog's doggy door is. We heard the doggy door open, which was strange as we only had the one pet. We looked down the hall and saw what looked exactly like our dog. Mom was beside herself with fright and said that now it looks like Molly, our dog. I was scared too, but aggressively said to it, "We know you're not her. She's dead. Fuck off." Then it made a horrifying noise. It sounded like a cat who had had its tail stomped on. It then bolted out of sight and through the doggy door. Mom and Dad decided that they wanted to move, so luckily we were able to move out about a month ago. I haven't seen anything out of the ordinary since that last incident, so I'm hoping it was attached more to the house than us. Number 2. I was living in a rural area in Oklahoma with my mother at a small lake house, and I'm probably 10 to 11 at this time. One night I'm sleeping in my room when I randomly and abruptly wake up for no reason. This was not normal for me, and I felt very uneasy. The only sound I could hear was my mother snoring in the next room on the couch. I rolled over and tried to go back to sleep, but my need to use the bathroom was growing more urgent, so I grudgingly forced myself to head that way. The bathroom is on the other side of the house, around a corner and past the kitchen, and finally down a long hallway on the right. So after I made the trip and finished my business, I flipped off the light switch and started heading back to bed. That's when I heard the distinct click of the light switch and I saw the glow of the bathroom light in the hallway. Terrified, I slowly turned around just to witness the lights in the bathroom start clicking on and off. Click, 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 click. Finally it shut completely off. In the dark of the hallway, my eyes began to make out a white shape near the end of the hallway. It was around my size and crouched to the floor. At this point, I'm frozen to the spot as my mind begins realizing that no one else is home except for my mom and myself. Then the white shape began whispering in a quiet man's voice, "Help me, I'm lost." I remember wanting to scream for my mom, but I couldn't, and instead I barely said no before this thing starts running at me on what sounded like all fours. I quickly ran through the kitchen and around the corner before running to my sleeping mother, shaking her awake. I remember saying, it's coming, and my mother's eyes going from dazed to alert in an instant. She asked me what was going on, and I saw her eyes look over my shoulder before she screamed. Remembering her scream still makes my blood run cold. Never had I heard pure terror like that in my life, even to this day. She grabs me by the arms and pulls me into my room and slams the door. She holds me in her arms with her back pressed against the door as we listen. It sounded like this thing was running around in circles in the kitchen. We could hear hands and feet slapping against the tile. The kitchen had a sliding glass door to the outside, which sounded like it was thrown open and slammed. We sat there horrified until daybreak. I was sent to my grandmother's house in the next town for a while after that, and never set foot in that house again. Years later, my mother said she went walking around the property after the incident and came across a small burial site with 3 headstones that each belonged to children from the early 1900s. It freaks me out because what I heard that night was a man's voice, but it was so unnatural. My mom still would not tell me what she saw behind me and what it was that made her scream. She tells me she's afraid it will know we're talking about it and it will come back. This is the first of many weird things that have happened in my life.